Welcome to threading the Ansley26 long arm quilting machine. Presented by Tin Lizzie, your affordable long arm quilters. Elegant, sophisticated, precise. The newest member of the Tin Lizzie family, Ansley26. The Ansley26 long arm quilting machine will have you experiencing long arm quilting on a whole new level. This machine allows quilters total freedom with options galore. All you have to do is think it, touch it, quilt it. Threading the Ansley26 long arm quilting machine is easy and intuitive, as you will see. Because this is an industrial type machine, there are a few more thread guides than on a standard sewing machine. It is important that the machine be threaded properly to help ensure proper stitch formation and accurate tensioning of the top thread. There are a few tools that may be of help in threading the machine. A long needle nose tweezers is helpful in grabbing the thread and feeding it through the guides. A small, sharp scissors should always be kept near while quilting. Before threading the needle, cut the thread end to easily thread the needle. You may find a needle threader helpful as well in threading the last thread eyelet and needle, as you will see. If you've never used a needle threader, you will see that it's an easy tool to use and makes threading a needle very quick. A needle threader consists of just two parts, the handle and the wire loop. To thread the needle, place the wire loop through the eye of the needle, place the cut end of the thread through the wire loop, and pull a few inches of thread through the wire loop. Gently pull the handle away from the needle and the thread will follow, passing through the eye. The needle is now threaded. Now let's thread the Ansley26 long arm quilting machine. The first thing to do is make sure to lift up on the tension release lever. This will put the hopper foot in the up position and release the tension on the tension assembly. This is an important step. If the tension release lever were left in the down position, the thread will not be able to seat properly between the discs in the thread tension assembly. The telescoping thread tree needs to be extended all the way up. Carefully grab the center of the thread tree and raise it to its highest position. Once raised, it will stay up. Cone thread adapters play a very important part in the threading process. These help stabilize the cone of thread on the spool pin of the thread stand. If a cone of thread were placed on a spool pin without the cone adapter, the cone of thread will wobble, potentially causing irregular stitches because the thread cannot feed off the spool evenly. When the thread is placed on the cone adapter, the cone of thread is stabilized and the thread is allowed to feed smoothly and evenly off the spool. After placing the cone of thread on the thread stand, find the thread end and bring the cut end of the thread to the guide directly above the spool. Slide the thread from the front of the tree right to left and the thread will slide into the guide. To the front of the thread stand is the first thread guide. The thread guide has 3 holes. Pass the cut end of the thread from the front to the back of the rightmost hole and then from the front to the back on the leftmost hole. To thread this guide, place the cut end of the thread through the rightmost hole from the front toward the back and then from the leftmost hole again from the front toward the back. To the left of the first thread guide is a 3-hole thread guide. Thread this guide from the top down on the right and leftmost holes. The thread will be gently pulled from the first guide to the right and leftmost holes. If the first, second, and third holes are threaded, more drag will be placed on the thread, causing slightly more tension, which is sometimes needed depending on the thread type being used. Gently pull down on the thread from the first guide toward the 3-hole thread guide. Place the cut end from the top down on the rightmost hole and then pass the cut end of the thread again, top to bottom, on the leftmost hole. Next to be threaded is the thread tension assembly. The thread tension assembly has two parts through which the thread must pass: the tension discs and the check spring. Be sure that the thread does not pass at the very back of the thread tension assembly, but between the discs. Remember the tension release lever was raised, and this opens up the tension disc to allow the thread to pass through without hesitation. The thread will pass from the 3-hole thread guide down to the right of the tension assembly, and as the thread is pulled toward the bottom, it will slide between the tension discs. Bring the thread up from the right to the left over the check spring, down around under the silver angle bracket, and around the guide above the thread tension assembly, and up toward the take-up lever. By placing one hand above the 3-hole thread guide and allowing the thread to pass through this hand as you thread the tension assembly, don't hold it too tight. The thread needs to pass through your fingers. Draw the end of the thread straight down from the 3-hole thread guide to the right of the tension assembly. Allow the thread to slip between the discs and give a little flossing motion to be sure the thread seats in the discs. Pass the thread down and around the bottom and from the top toward the left over the check spring. The check spring will move up and down as stitches are formed. From there, pass the thread under the silver angle bracket to the left and slide the thread from the right to the left through the thread guide above the thread tension assembly and up toward the take-up lever. When threaded, it should look like this. Always be sure the thread is seated properly between the tension discs. Next will be to pass the thread from back to front through the thread eyelet on the take-up lever. Pass the cut end of the thread from the back toward the front through the thread eyelet on the take-up lever and then straight down. At the bottom left of the guard will be another thread guide. Simply slide the thread from the left to the right and it will slip into the guide and be secure. Slide the thread from the left to the right and it will slip into the thread guide. To the right side at the front of the machine is another thread guide. Be sure not to miss this one. Gently pull the thread straight down and from the right slide the thread into the guide. The last guide is the thread eyelet above the needle. You may thread this and the needle by hand or by using the needle threader. The thread passes from the front to the back through the thread eyelet, and then the needle will be threaded from the front to the back as well. To thread the thread eyelet, place the cut end of the thread from the front to the back. Clip the thread end if needed so that there's a clean end. Thread the eye of the needle from the front to the back as well. And pull out a length of thread to be ready for the quilting process. If you find it easier, use a needle threader. To thread the eyelet needle with a needle threader, pass the wire loop from the back to the front and place the cut end of the thread through the wire loop and draw the thread from the front of the thread eyelet to the back. Pass the wire loop from the back to the front of the needle. Thread it, and then draw the thread from the front of the needle to the back. Be sure to pull a length of thread through the needle before stitching begins. Be sure the eye of the needle faces to the front and that the thread passes from the front to the back through the eye. Now let's watch one last time as the Ansley26 long arm quilting machine is threaded. Be sure the tension release lever is in the up position to release tension in the thread tension assembly. Place the thread on the thread stand and pass the thread through the guide directly above the spool in the thread tree. Bring the thread from the front to the back around the rightmost and leftmost holes of the first thread guide. In the 3-hole thread guide, bring the thread from the top through the right and leftmost holes. Hold the thread above the 3-hole thread guide to place a little tension on it. Pass the thread to the right of the tension assembly and give a little flossing motion to be sure the thread seats in the middle of the disc. Take the thread from the right to the left over the check spring, then under the silver angle bracket, slide it into the thread guide above the tension assembly, and from the back to the front through the eyelet in the thread take-up. Next, pass the thread down through the last 2 thread guides, and from there, thread the thread eyelet above the needle. And finally, thread the needle, passing the thread from the front to the back. Be sure to draw enough thread to begin the quilting process. One final thing. When changing a spool of thread, don't just pull the spool off the thread stand, allowing the thread to travel backward through the tension assembly. This may damage the check spring. Instead, raise the tension release lever, clip the thread from above the spool, remove the thread from the eye of the needle, and draw the thread out. This follows the natural thread path and prevents any damage. Thank you for viewing this video by Tin Lizzie, your affordable long arm quilters.